"She's fine. The boy got in the way." That's what Tess Margrave, vice president of our HOA board, shrieked as I held my 10-year-old son's face together with both hands. Her boyfriend, Lyle, still stood 10 feet away, his gun limp in his hand, like he hadn't just pulled the trigger in the middle of a child's birthday party. And I'll never forget her next words. "If you report this, you'll be cited for hosting an unregistered event." That was her move. Not panic, not remorse, but policy. I turned slowly, my hands sticky with Callan's blood. "This isn't a firework injury," I said, my voice level. "That round was hollow point. The casing matches the ones Lyle keeps under your bed. I taught ballistic signature recognition for 18 years. Your little lie won't hold an hour." If you're watching this and you're a parent, especially one living under an HOA, you need to subscribe now. I'm going to show you exactly how far these people will go when they think you'll stay quiet, and why silence nearly cost my son his life. I'm Ronan Mirek. I served with the DEA for 22 years. I wasn't a street agent. I designed our internal trauma response protocol, taught tactical containment, and spent the last decade building forensic curriculum now used in over 40 field offices. And the blood I'm covered in, that's my son's, not from some cartel ambush or midnight raid, but from my own backyard, from a birthday party. Tess's boyfriend, Lyle Brennett, had a history, and the HOA knew it, but they let him roam freely, even after neighbors quietly reported erratic behavior, threats, and one time, a dog found shot near the cul-de-sac. They erased those reports. You won't find them in the HOA minutes, but I will show you how I found proof. And the thing that burns worse than the gunshot itself? That party was everything to Callan. His vision had been slipping since last winter, an autoimmune retinal condition that gave him 6 months, maybe less, before total blindness. That treehouse we built together behind our fence, he wanted to see it one last time, filled with lights, balloons, and his cousins. That party was his final memory of the world in color. And now he can't even see it, because Tess let her unstable boyfriend carry a loaded weapon onto my property and fire it, then tried to blame us for it. The second I saw Callan drop, I didn't think. I was at his side, assessing pupil response, pressure loss, arterial bleed. I yelled for a belt, anyone's. Neighbors froze. Some turned away. One of Tess's supporters even started filming, but not to help, just in case I retaliated. And through all of it, Tess stood by the gate, arms folded, barking about noise permits. It wasn't until I saw Lyle try to pocket the casing that I snapped out of survival mode. I handed Callan off to my brother, also DEA, also present, and went straight to the security pole we'd installed 2 years ago. Redundant, self-looping, unconnected to the HOA's cloud. Tess didn't know it existed. Neither did Lyle. And when they tried to claim the shot came from a firework malfunction, I already had frame-by-frame proof of Lyle drawing, pointing, firing. The bullet didn't even strike directly. It hit the corner of the treehouse railing, shattered a decorative solar lamp, and sent fragments of glass and wood into my son's eyes. Tess said that wasn't their responsibility. She'll regret those words. Because this time, they didn't just mess with a gazebo permit or someone's mailbox color. They took my son's future. And the same way I taught new agents how to dismantle cartels through lawful pressure, I'm going to dismantle this HOA, piece by corrupt piece. And if you've ever felt helpless in the face of an overreaching board, or watched someone hide behind neighborhood power, or lost something because no one else would speak up, then stay here. Because what's coming next, they're not ready for it. Where are you watching from? The emergency room lights burned too bright, humming above us like they didn't know my son's world had just gone dark. I sat outside the surgical ward. Callan's blood dried and cracked across my palms, soaking into the skin like ink. Nurses passed me with polite urgency, their eyes darting to the red stains, then away. My brother sat beside me in silence. DEA badge still clipped to his belt, his jaw locked so tight it trembled. Behind the doors, they were trying to save what was left of my son's optic nerves. And Tess Margrave, the vice president of our HOA, had already gone back home. She was probably making tea, maybe calling her little circle to spin the story. I knew how she worked, how she operated behind the curtain of policy, always smiling for the public, always exacting in private. But she didn't start with me. A year ago, she fined the Valencias for having a child's inflatable pool in their side yard, claimed it was a mosquito hazard, made them deflate it daily. Their kid was 5. Another neighbor, Ms. Renwick, got 2 warnings for hosting non-compliant garage sales. One of them was a charity drive for a cancer survivor. Then came the stories that didn't make the newsletter. Tess's boyfriend, Lyle, threatening a high school kid over a noise complaint, a dog found dead on Braxton Lane, a front door kicked in and written off as storm damage on the HOA report. Each time, no charges, no warnings, and the HOA claimed insufficient evidence. Braden Core, the board secretary, always looked away during those meetings, like he couldn't quite swallow what he was helping them bury. The pattern was there. You just had to connect the people, not the events. That's what I did for a living. I kept my hands folded, elbows resting on my knees. Beside me, my brother finally spoke. "They're gonna bury it," he muttered. I didn't answer. "They'll say it was a firework, say the kid knocked over a lamp. She's already on the phone with someone. She wasn't scared, Ronan. She was preparing." She always was. And just like that, I could see the whole strategy. Tess would claim the party was unregistered. Lyle was merely visiting and concerned about neighborhood safety. The injury? Unfortunate, misinterpreted. She would cite noise complaints that were never filed. She would wave policies like flags. But policies don't override trauma or the truth. I closed my eyes and thought about the last HOA meeting I'd attended just 2 weeks ago. Tess stood up and reminded the community that all conflict can be avoided through proper procedure. Her words, a mask of order worn over a mouth full of manipulation. She didn't serve this neighborhood, she ruled it, and Lyle was her enforcer, unofficial, but always nearby, always armed. I remembered Callan's face that morning. He was nervous. His vision had worsened overnight, and he whispered to me, "Dad, what if I don't remember what everyone looks like?" So we took pictures, laughed, ate waffles. I made him promise he'd hold on to all of it. Then we built that party for him, lights strung through the treehouse, a surprise banner, water balloons. A final day where he could see the people who loved him. And Lyle took that from him. I stood, my legs sore and stiff, and stepped outside. The hospital parking lot was quiet under the evening sky, and I could finally breathe without tasting disinfectant. A couple I didn't know leaned against a Prius, whispering. When they saw me, they looked down. The man said, "We're neighbors from Vista del Val." I nodded. "You saw what happened?" His eyes shifted. "We heard the shot. Then Tess told everyone it was a bottle rocket, said your kid got glass in his eye." My throat dried. "She told people not to mention Lyle's name to the responders," his wife added. "Said it would complicate things." That was all I needed. She was already spinning the story while my son bled. I thanked them and walked back inside. By the time the surgeon approached, I was ready. My mind wasn't in the hospital anymore. It was back home, charting a path. This wasn't going to end with an insurance claim and another HOA newsletter. It was going to end with accountability, with federal eyes, with Tess's little empire pulled apart, one lie at a time. Braden Core paced the far edge of the hospital parking lot like a man trying not to be seen by his own shadow. I noticed him only because he kept stopping, pulling his phone out, then shoving it back into his pocket like it burned. He wore the same slate gray jacket he always wore to HOA meetings, zipped all the way up despite the heat. The kind of man who dressed to disappear. HOA secretary, keeper of records, professional note-taker. The quiet one who never voted against Tess Margrave but never quite looked comfortable voting with her either. He stood near the overflow fence, back turned toward the entrance, voice low but sharp. I didn't mean to overhear. I wasn't stalking him. I was just outside trying to breathe air that didn't smell like antiseptic and grief. "I'm telling you, that's not what happened," Braden hissed into his phone. "You can't just— No, Tess, listen to me." He stopped pacing. His shoulders sagged. "No, I'm not saying we report anything yet. I'm saying people saw it. Multiple people." There was a long pause. I could picture Tess on the other end, arms crossed, lips tight, already drafting the narrative. Braden dragged a hand down his face. "You told everyone it was fireworks, but that doesn't explain the casing, or why Lyle ran." Another pause, longer this time. "I know he's your boyfriend. That doesn't change what this is." I felt something twist in my chest. Not relief, recognition. Braden had always been like this. The man who knew something was wrong, but lacked the spine to stand up when it mattered. Until now. He lowered his voice even further. "You asked me to clean the incident log. I haven't. I can't, not this time." My breath caught. "You're talking about a kid, Tess," he said. "A blind kid." Silence on the line again. Braden leaned against the hood of a car, staring at nothing. "I'm not trying to destroy you," he said quietly. "I'm trying to stop you from making this worse." He ended the call and just stood there, phone dangling from his hand, like he dropped something heavy and didn't know whether to pick it back up. I could have stepped forward then, could have said his name, could have forced the moment. I didn't. Years of interrogation training told me something simple. People under pressure will tell the truth if you let them arrive there themselves. Braden wasn't ready yet, but he was cracking. He looked smaller, standing there alone. Not weak, just tired. A man who'd told himself for years that keeping the peace mattered more than doing the right thing, and had just realized the cost of that lie. I walked back toward the entrance, slow, measured. Let him think he was alone. Inside, my brother sat with his elbows on his knees, eyes closed. He opened them when he sensed me. "Someone else heard it," I said quietly. He didn't ask who. "They're scrambling," I continued, "and one of them doesn't want to be part of it anymore." He nodded once. "That's how it starts." Behind the glass doors, a nurse wheeled a cart past, her shoes squeaking softly against the floor. The hospital hummed on, indifferent to the war forming just outside. Braden Core wasn't a hero. He wasn't brave. He wasn't suddenly on my side. But he was scared. And scared people make mistakes. They talk. They hesitate. They leave trails they don't even realize exist. Tess thought she controlled everyone on that board. She thought compliance was loyalty. She was wrong, because while she was busy rewriting reality over the phone, Braden was standing alone in a parking lot, realizing he'd helped build something that just blinded a child. And guilt has a way of loosening locked doors. The HOA letter was waiting on my porch the next morning, folded once, tucked under a smooth river stone like it hadn't followed a gunshot the day before. Violation notice, it read in all caps. Unauthorized event, non-permitted structures, community safety breach. There were 3 boxes checked: noise, temporary constructions, risk to minors. I stood on my porch, treehouse still draped in limp balloons behind me, and read it again. They were filing the party as a code violation. My son was blind, and their response wasn't an apology. It was a fine. I stepped back inside and laid the letter on the counter, next to Callan's unopened birthday cards and a get well plant someone had dropped off. The house was too quiet. No cartoons playing. No giggling from the hallway. Just the sound of the AC kicking in and the soft whir of the oxygen compressor we'd had delivered for his post-op room. I'd seen some twisted tactics in my DEA years, cover-ups, planted evidence, threats in legal wrapping. But this was different. This wasn't a cartel. It was a community board built on paper authority, now using it to bury blood. My brother sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open, eyes locked on the HOA's website. "They updated the minutes already," he muttered. "Posted last night." "Let me guess," I said. "No mention of the shooting." He turned the screen toward me. "Filed as disruptive neighborhood incident. No formal charges at this time." I scanned the page. Lyle's name wasn't there. Callan's name wasn't there. Just vague phrasing and a polite reminder for homeowners to file events a minimum of 2 weeks in advance. They were reframing what happened as a homeowner's mistake. Mine. That's when I realized this wasn't just about shielding Lyle. It was about self-preservation. Tess and the board weren't going to admit anything, not because they believed Lyle was innocent, but because the moment they did, their liability exploded. This was legal survival, and they were going to try to hang it around my neck. I walked out the back door into the yard. The treehouse stood quiet, soaked in silence. The broken railing where the bullet had struck was still splintered. I hadn't touched it. Couldn't. I crouched beside the flower bed and traced the spot where Callan had dropped. There were still faint lines in the soil from where I'd dropped to my knees. Then I looked up at the pole. Most people forget where their security systems point, or what they store, or when the auto-deletion kicks in. I don't forget. 2 years ago, when a string of late-night thefts made it into our neighborhood Facebook group, I installed a redundant system on our property, a wide lens sensor and storage device that looped directly to a hard drive inside our wall safe. Not cloud-based, not network-connected, no HOA access, no risk of deletion from outside interference. I'd installed it out of habit, not paranoia, a fallback, insurance. Now it was the only thing standing between Tess's narrative and the truth. I went inside, unlocked the wall panel, and slid the drive into my laptop. There it was, footage from the backyard, time-stamped, full audio. Not just the shot, but Lyle's posture, his words before it happened, the angle of the discharge, even Tess in the background yelling not to call the cops. It was all there. I scrubbed frame by frame until I froze it. Lyle, right arm extended, barrel down, Callan near the railing, and then recoil. I sat back in the chair. This wasn't just negligence, it was reckless endangerment, discharge of a firearm in proximity to minors, at minimum, at worst, felony-level assault. But more importantly, this was admissible. and Tess didn't know I had it. They were going to hit me with letters. They'd pile on violations, try to revoke access to common areas, maybe even push for fines, threats of liens. But I had the one thing they couldn't erase: proof. The ophthalmologist didn't look me in the eye when he walked into the exam room. His name was Dr. Harrell, soft-spoken, the kind of man who had probably delivered every kind of news to every kind of parent. But the way he held the file, pressed flat against his chest like a shield, told me everything before he spoke. "The trauma was extensive," he said gently. "Both corneas were compromised. There's optic nerve involvement, and no light response in either eye." My wife squeezed my hand so hard my fingers numbed. I barely noticed. My eyes were on Callan, who sat upright on the exam table, a soft wrap covering both eyes, legs swinging a little off the edge like he didn't understand yet. He did. He always understood more than people gave him credit for. Dr. Harrell kept talking. Options, surgeries, maybe future procedures, none of which would restore vision, only manage pain or structure. It blurred together. My mind was already shifting, not to grief, to structure, because I'd just been handed the final piece I needed. Confirmation, no ambiguity, no temporary swelling, no wait and see. Callan was blind, and now every person who tried to dismiss what happened as an accident was legally walking into a new territory: permanent harm, lasting trauma, a measurable medical outcome tied to a specific event, time, and actor. And I had the footage. We left the hospital in silence. My wife sat in the back seat with Callan, whispering about his favorite audiobooks and asking if he wanted to listen to one. He asked for the one about the space dog, the one that drifts off into the stars and finds a planet of children who dream in colors. I drove slower than usual. My foot kept hovering. Near the brake, the world felt thinner. The neighborhood came into view like a war zone I no longer recognized. Flags still fluttered from a recent HOA-sponsored Patriot Week. Sidewalks were clean, lawns trimmed. From a distance, it all looked safe, orderly. But behind that illusion, Tess Margrave was already laying the next trap. I saw it before I even pulled into my driveway. 2 new orange slips on my front gate. Violation notice. Unapproved external surveillance equipment. And below it, another. Violation notice. Visual debris. Unsafe play structures. They were going after the treehouse now, and the security camera I'd used to catch the truth. They weren't trying to intimidate me anymore. They were trying to destroy the evidence. I didn't rip the notices down. I photographed them, time-stamped the metadata, and backed them up. Then I went inside and sat at my desk. I opened my digital case file, new folder, new structure. I labeled it Vista del Valle, negligent oversight, plus child harm, HOA versus Mirek, and I began documenting. Medical records attached, security footage exported, 3 backups created, 1 local, 1 cloud encrypted, 1 offline drive. Witness statements, initial summaries logged, beginning with the couple outside the ER and Braden's overheard call. HOA notices, every digital newsletter, violation report, and meeting minute, cataloged by timestamp and compared against real-world events. It felt mechanical, but it wasn't. It was focused, exacting, legal. Tess thought she was the authority, but she didn't understand the difference between policy and precedent. Rules don't override law, and hiding behind bylaws doesn't shield anyone when the state and federal agencies are shown proof of obstruction and harm. I typed until the sun dipped behind the neighbor's fence. Then I sat back and looked at the screen. This wasn't vengeance. It was a case. And I'd built hundreds of them before, but never one like this. Never one that started with the sound of a child crying and ended with a silent room filled with cards my son would never read. This time, the target wasn't a gang or a lab in the desert. It was a woman with too much power, a man with no restraint, and a system of silence that had gone unchecked for years. But now the silence had a crack in it. The silence didn't last. The next morning, I woke to the sound of a metal clang outside, followed by a voice. Male, irritated, performing, not speaking. I walked out the front door and saw them. 2 HOA compliance enforcers Tess had hired last year when the board voted to professionalize inspections. They wore neon yellow vests with clipboards in hand. One of them was photographing the treehouse. The other pointed up with a telescopic measuring stick, documenting dimensions like it was a condemned building. This structure violates Article 12.2. Elevated play installations must be certified and approved for visual compliance, one of them recited loudly. I stayed on the porch. You're recording, I assume? I asked. Per HOA policy, yes, sir, he replied, without looking at me. Good, I said. He finally met my eyes. You'll be receiving a demolition notice, the other added, lowering his clipboard, and a formal order to remove unauthorized surveillance hardware within 48 hours. They didn't know it yet, but every word they said was being picked up by my system. The same system they were trying to cite as unauthorized. They were building my case for me, line by line, like idiots who thought a clipboard and a vest gave them immunity. When they left, I walked straight to the treehouse. I stepped inside. The light through the slats caught the dust still hanging in the air. The broken railing had splinters, jagged like a torn book spine. I placed my hand there, just for a moment, feeling where the bullet had torn through wood, lamp, and then glass, and then my son's eyes. Callan had always loved it up there. It wasn't fancy. No slides, no cargo net, just a wood platform, hand-built with my brother, a few throw pillows, and a little cutout for his telescope. He called it his sky fort. Now the HOA wanted to tear it down, not for safety, for optics, to erase what had happened. I returned to my desk. The case file had grown overnight. 7 new pages, updated HOA minutes, 2 digital correspondences forwarded anonymously from a neighbor. One of them was the email Tess had sent to the board at 11:32 p.m. the night of the shooting. Subject line, urgent, narrative consolidation. She wrote, "To ensure community peace and insurance protection, we must align our statements. Please confirm the event occurred off-property and involved a bottle rocket from neighboring guests." She hadn't even tried to veil it. It was obstruction, coordination of false statements, and once it hit federal review, it would all unravel. I opened a new tab and drafted a memo, addressed to my old contact at the ATF, who now worked firearms compliance cases. I didn't attach evidence yet. I wasn't ready to go nuclear, but I made the intent clear. I included brief summaries, timestamps, and the quote from the medical report confirming permanent harm. I marked it as preliminary notice, not an official complaint. But I made one thing crystal clear. There was a suppressed pattern of firearm-related HOA incidents involving Lyle Burnett that were ignored, buried, or redirected. This wasn't about one shot. It was about the ecosystem that let him carry that weapon into my yard. After I hit save, I sat back and stared at the screen. That morning, Callan had asked if the balloons were still up. He couldn't see them, but he asked anyway. I told him yes. I left them there, wilting slowly in the sun, because he wanted them. because I wanted him to feel, just for a little longer, like his world still had color in it. They would try to take that too, with forms, with bylaws, with clipped language designed to make horror sound like an administrative oversight. But I had built something stronger than that. I had evidence. I had federal procedural knowledge. And now I had intent. No more waiting. Braden Core showed up at my front door just after 9, holding a weather-warped folder like it might explode. He didn't knock right away, just stood there, shifting on his feet, eyes darting across the street like he wasn't sure whose loyalty was watching. I opened the door before he could talk himself out of it. "You alone?" he asked. "My brother's inside," I said. "But yeah." He stepped in like he expected a trap, clutching the folder tighter than most people held their wallets. I didn't speak. I let him pace. "This isn't official," he started. "It can't be traced back to me." I raised an eyebrow. "If it's what I think it is, that's exactly why it matters." He swallowed and handed me the folder. Inside were copies, meeting minutes, emails, violation drafts that never got sent. But what caught my eye was a document with red digital markup, an earlier version of the HOA's internal report on the shooting. The original title, Incident Report, Property 1447, Firearm Discharge. It had Lyle's name on it, his full name, time, approximate distance to the child. A note about prior warnings, 2 specifically, including 1 flagged as verbal threat toward minor, not escalated. There was even a line about insurance exposure. Recommend internal handling. External reporting could trigger board liability due to unfiled prior warnings. My hands tightened around the paper. "You're telling me Tess saw this and had it rewritten?" Braden didn't answer. He didn't have to. "She had me delete it," he said after a beat. "Said it was an overreaction. Said if we filed anything that mentioned Lyle, we'd get sued or dropped by the liability carrier. I saved the draft, couldn't throw it out." He looked sick just saying it. I stepped back from the folder. "Why now?" He leaned against the wall, like standing took effort. "Because I have a nephew, and he plays in that same park. And I looked at your son in that hospital lobby, and I realized I'd become the kind of man I used to hate." That I hadn't expected. He pulled out one last item, a USB drive. "Meeting recordings. I didn't even know my system was auto-archiving the Zooms. But I pulled every one that mentions Lyle. There's more than you'd think." I took it from him. "You know this puts you in their crosshairs," I said. He nodded. "I don't care. Not anymore." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Ronan, this board was never supposed to be like this. It used to be about gardens and community movie nights. But then Tess got on, and everything became about control." "She's not going to walk away from this," I said quietly. "I hope not," he replied. He left without another word. I brought the folder to my desk and opened my case file. I didn't feel victorious. I felt angry. The kind of anger that doesn't shout, doesn't flare. The kind that files forms at midnight and doesn't miss a single line. Because now I had something that changed the game. I had proof the HOA knew, that they were warned, that they logged the threat, that they had a chance, multiple documented chances, to prevent this, and they chose silence. I plugged in the USB. The audio files were crisp. Tess's voice dominated every conversation. She cut people off, redirected blame, and twice made jokes about not wanting another insurance mess when Lyle's name came up. This wasn't a rogue boyfriend. This was institutional protection. I backed everything up 3 times. sent a copy to a private encrypted storage server I used for high-risk field data, sent another to my brother with instructions to open if I ever went silent, and I added a new tag to the case file: early complicity, HOA suppression timeline, core evidence. When I walked outside, the air smelled like cut grass and chlorine. Kids were laughing somewhere down the street. Balloons still floated, half deflated, in the treehouse behind me. I left them up because I wasn't finished yet. By the time the sun dipped behind the western ridge, I had every name, date, and timestamp mapped like a crime scene. I wasn't building a revenge file. I was constructing a prosecutorial scaffold. Every claim Tess made in her fake minutes, every threat buried in HOA newsletters, every instance where the board had written off Lyle's behavior as outside HOA scope. All of it had to thread toward one airtight outcome: intervention. Not a lawsuit, not a community petition. I needed outside authority, and I knew exactly how to trigger it. I'd worked with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives for over a decade during my time with the DEA. They didn't care about gossip or HOA politics. They cared about violations of federal law, especially when repeat firearm misuse coincided with suppressed internal complaints. If I could prove the HOA had prior knowledge of Lyle's instability and still allowed him to act as an informal security presence, that alone was enough to open an ATF inquiry, especially with a child now permanently blinded. I drafted the complaint, not emotional, precise. I cited 18 U.S. Code, PIRF 922, unlawful possession and discharge of a firearm by a person with a known history of aggression. I included the unredacted incident draft Braden had given me, complete with Lyle's name, prior board warnings, and Tess's handwritten edits in the margins. Then I attached the footage. The frame where Lyle's muzzle dropped low, where Callan stepped into view, where the solar lamp exploded in a scatter of glass and steel, where my son screamed and fell out of frame. No narration, no music, just facts. I uploaded the file set to a secure federal portal marked Urgent, Immediate Threat to Public Safety. Then I moved to the next step: insurance. The HOA's policy wasn't public, but I knew how these setups worked. Most communities of our size operated under shared liability coverage with stipulations for firearm incidents. If I could prove Tess had directed the board to hide the real nature of the shooting, the policy carrier would be obligated to review, not out of kindness, but to protect their own legal exposure. I composed a second packet, no footage, just documents, HOA meeting red lines, witness quotes, the ER bill, the emergency surgeon's report. I sent it through a contact I had in claims litigation, someone who'd handled complex denial patterns in California after the wildfires. Then I pulled out a notepad and wrote one sentence at the top: back channel confirmations. Below that, I listed every name in the neighborhood who'd spoken to me in hushed tones or sideways glances. Every resident who'd hinted they saw more than they admitted. People who just needed the right moment to speak. I'd start knocking doors soon, but first I needed to protect the source. I called Braden on a secure line. Tess suspects someone's leaking, I said. Of course she does. You're not going to take the fall for this. I already have. No, we make you the witness, not the whistleblower. You're going to submit an anonymous tip to the HOA's own ethics board. You're going to say you overheard a conversation and that you're concerned about insurance fraud and suppression of critical incident reporting. No names, just a flag. She'll trace it to me. Let her try, I said. The second she responds in writing, I'll have her acknowledgement. It'll be chain of custody from there. Braden exhaled. You really think this is going to work? It already is. We hung up. I added a new folder to my drive. Initiated action, agency triggers, plus carrier escalation. Then I stood up, rolled my shoulders, and looked out the front window. Across the street, a couple of neighbors were walking their dogs. Someone waved at me. It wasn't the cold wave of suspicion. It was the first real one I'd seen in weeks. The kind you give to someone you think might actually change something. By the end of the week, I had a wall of silence, and then one break. The first few neighbors I approached didn't say much. Polite nods, apologies without real words. One woman nearly cried, but wouldn't open the door. I didn't blame them. They'd seen what Tess was capable of, seen what happened to people who pushed back. But silence doesn't last when fear turns into shame. It was Troy Bellman who finally gave me something I could use. Retired contractor, lived 3 houses down, built half the fences on the block back when the development was still half dirt. We weren't close, but he knew. Callan used to give him candy from his garden shed every Halloween. He met me out front with a cup of coffee and didn't even wait for me to ask. I saw him raise the gun, he said. Didn't see the bullet, but I heard the angle. That wasn't a firework. That was a short barrel pop. 9mm, maybe .380. I'm not an expert, but I was Army. I know the sound. I nodded slowly. Would you say that if it meant you'd be involved? I'm already involved, he said. I live here. And I saw Tess go door to door afterward, telling people to say it was noise from the backyard, not the street. That made him the 4th person who'd said something similar. Quietly, without knowing the others had already broken. But Troy did more than speak. He handed me a worn brown envelope. Don't ask how I got it, he said. Let's just say my security system works better than theirs. Inside was a printed still frame from a street-facing camera mounted under his garage light. It showed Lyle stepping off Tess's porch that morning, wearing the same clothes from the party, same holster visible at his hip. It was time-stamped at 6:17 a.m., the morning after the shooting, meaning he hadn't been taken in, hadn't turned himself over. He was still living under Tess's roof while the HOA actively deflected attention from his actions. I logged the image into the case file. Continuing presence of known risk. Timeline confirmed. Later that afternoon, I drove to a contact of mine, Ari Feldman, a civil attorney who specialized in liability claims and bad faith insurance denials. He owed me 2 favors and had a background in HOA governance before switching sides. He flipped through the file, page by page, then sat back. You're not just holding a liability claim, he said. You're holding structural negligence. If this goes to court, they don't just pay a fine. They lose their umbrella policy. They lose personal indemnity. Good, I said. I mean, all of them, Ronan. Even the ones who didn't vote on it. Unless they speak up and separate themselves. They'll have their chance. He passed the file back. You bring this to ATF and insurance simultaneously, that HOA folds, fast. But that's not the real pressure. What is? Community optics. Once you put this in front of the neighborhood, the real footage, the injury report, the board's internal redactions, you won't need federal pressure. You'll have public combustion. That night, I wrote the outline for the exposure plan. 3 phases, no surprises, no theatrics, just facts presented in an order Tess couldn't spin fast enough. Phase 1, quiet disclosures. Braden would anonymously alert the HOA Ethics Committee. I would release a legal summary to the community. No accusations, just questions backed by screenshots and timestamps. Phase 2. Insurance trigger. Let the carrier initiate their own inquiry. Once the insurer saw the EES risk, they'd force the board to respond. That would put them in a bind. Either lie and risk fraud, or admit fault and trigger ATF review. Phase 3. Community reckoning. A neighborhood town hall, not digital, in person, with every neighbor in attendance, with every fact printed, sourced, and delivered. By the end of Phase 3, the HOA would be publicly discredited, stripped of leadership, and forced to choose between legal resignation or facing external litigation. I named the folder Operation Clarity because my son would never see again. But the rest of us? We would. The morning light hit the neighborhood in thin streaks through the eucalyptus trees, casting long shadows over the neat sidewalks and manicured lawns. From my front window, I could see the HOA board members arriving at Tess's house one by one, unknowing that their entire world was about to shift. They carried clipboards, printed violation notices, and the same smug expressions they'd worn for years. They thought control was still in their hands. They were wrong. I moved quietly through the house, gathering my gear: laptop, external drives, USB backups, printed copies of security footage, hospital reports, timestamps, and the small recorder Braden had provided. Each piece had been carefully organized in sequence, ready to be deployed at a moment's notice. I didn't feel nervous, not fear, not excitement, calm, focused. Every year with the DEA had conditioned me to this, to prepare, to anticipate every possible contingency, and to act decisively when the time came. Out in the yard, the treehouse still bore the remnants of yesterday's celebration. Deflated balloons drooped over the splintered railing. The bullet scar was still visible on the corner plank. I walked around it slowly, careful not to disturb anything. This wasn't just about strategy. This was about preserving reality, documenting the truth in its purest form before the HOA could touch a single piece of evidence. The treehouse was the anchor, the witness to what had occurred. Every splinter, every shard of glass, every droplet of blood that had dried into the wood spoke louder than any complaint or violation notice they could draft. I set up my laptop on the patio table, pulling in all relevant feeds and documents: security footage from the backyard cameras, timestamps from neighbors' observations, hospital records confirming Callan's injury, and emails exchanged between Braden and the board. Each piece built the frame of the undeniable narrative. As I connected each file, I felt the weight of the situation settle, like pressing down a hammer on a series of carefully aligned nails. Precision, patience, and timing. These would be the keys to dismantling Tess's control. I reviewed the first video clip, frozen at the exact moment Lyle's hand went up with the gun. The timestamp glowed at 6:17 p.m. The trajectory, the recoil, the expression on his face, indisputable. Tess was visible in the background, arms crossed, ordering neighbors not to call for help, giving the perfect demonstration of deliberate inaction. Every frame was evidence of the negligence that had enabled this violence. This was the core of the strategy, the indisputable fact that the HOA had been complicit. Once satisfied, I moved to the printed records. I aligned hospital reports with the video footage and timestamps, creating a seamless chronological dossier. Each note highlighted what the HOA knew, what they suppressed, and the immediate consequences of their inaction. This wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. Each document reinforced the inevitable conclusion that their authority had been misused, and that federal and insurance intervention was justified. Any deviation, any omission, and the credibility of the case could crumble. But everything I had assembled was airtight. I glanced out the window. The board members were pacing in front of Tess's house, whispering to each other, unaware that the moment of reckoning had already begun to be meticulously prepared. I could see their confidence waver with each passing minute, though they didn't know why. That confidence was fragile, built on the assumption that fear and bureaucracy would protect them. They had underestimated the convergence of evidence and preparation. Finally, I reviewed the plan one more time. Phase 1. Private disclosure and ethical committee alert via Braden. Phase 2. Insurance engagement, forcing board transparency and triggering external investigation. Phase 3. Controlled public exposure with the community fully informed. Each stage flowed into the next, leaving no opportunity for Tess or her board to deflect, obfuscate, or manipulate the narrative. Timing, sequence, and clarity were everything. I exhaled, letting the morning tension release slightly. Callan's laughter from the living room, faint but audible, reminded me of why this mattered. The objective wasn't just to hold the board accountable, it was to reclaim a sense of justice and integrity for the neighborhood, for my son, and for every witness who had remained silent out of fear. This operation had to succeed, not for vengeance, but for truth, for permanence, and for the protection of those who couldn't defend themselves. By the time the community hall doors opened, the air inside felt electrically charged, thick with expectation, fear, and something else I hadn't felt in this neighborhood for a long time. Courage. People filed in slowly, whispering, glancing toward Tess and the other HOA board members who stood near the front like royalty waiting to be admired. But there was a crack in their posture, a stiffness in Tess's smile. The board had sensed something shifting. The carrier's audit notice had landed that morning. I knew because the HOA had hand-delivered violation warnings to half the block within an hour, a desperate attempt to reassert control. It didn't work. People still came. Dozens. Neighbors I'd never seen outside their homes. Couples who always kept their heads down. Parents holding their kids' hands a little too tightly. They came because they had questions, and because, for once, answers might not be filtered through Tess's mouth. I stood near the back, letting the room settle. I wasn't hiding. I was waiting. The first move had to be theirs. Tess tapped the microphone like she'd rehearsed this moment. Thank you all for attending this emergency board session. There's been confusion in the neighborhood, and we're here to clarify the situation before misinformation spreads beyond repair. She emphasized that last phrase, a warning disguised as a reassurance. Lyle wasn't present. Of course he wasn't. The board had claimed he was out of town visiting family, though several neighbors had seen him on Tess's porch that morning. It didn't matter. His absence made the stage even clearer. We want to assure the community, Tess continued, that the unfortunate accident involving the Mirek family was not caused by any form of violence, nor was it connected to residents' firearms. It was a misjudged celebration item, and, "Is that your official statement?" I asked, stepping forward. Her jaw froze. "Excuse me? Is that the statement you're submitting to your insurer?" I repeated. "And to the auditors now reviewing your liability policy?" A ripple went through the room. Tess glanced at her board members, shooting daggers at Braden in particular, who stared down at his folded hands. She tried to regain her composure. "This meeting is not for—" "It is," I said, walking to the front. because you're addressing the community on a matter being investigated by outside authorities. So you should be very sure, absolutely certain, that the words you're about to say are accurate." A murmur spread like a brush fire. Tess gripped the podium. "There are no outside authorities investigating anything," she snapped. I opened my folder. "Let's start with the footage." I projected the first video on the wall-size screen using the hall's AV system, something Tess clearly hadn't expected me to access. But Braden had quietly told me the passcode that afternoon. As the lights dimmed, the opening frame froze the room. Lyle, gun visible, Callan stepping into frame, and then impact. Someone gasped. Someone else cursed under their breath. A mother covered her child's eyes. The room tightened as the reality settled into every corner. Tess's face drained of color. "This is out of context." "Play the rest," someone whispered from the third row. I did. The audio came through next. Lyle yelling, the blast, my son screaming, a few faint voices, neighbors, frantic, uncertain. And behind it all, Tess's sharp command ordering no one to call emergency services. When the clip ended, the silence was absolute. I walked slowly, back to the podium. "This," I said quietly, "is the truth. Not a bottle rocket, not a misfired party item, not a rumor the board tried to control." I switched to the next document, a draft of the original HOA report, complete with Tess's edits removing Lyle's name. "Your board suppressed mandatory incident reporting. You coordinated false statements, and you attempted to destroy evidence by issuing citation notices demanding removal of the very equipment that recorded this." Someone stood up, a neighbor who had never once attended a board meeting. "Is that illegal?" she asked softly. "Very," I replied. "And the insurer reviewing this now understands exactly how much liability has been concealed." Another voice. "What about the ATF? Are they involved?" Tess snapped. "There is no federal involvement." I clicked to the final slide. A confirmation notice. "Case initiated. Firearms compliance review. The first investigation. The first crack." The room exploded, not in chaos, but in clarity. People demanded explanations. Board members shrank back. And Tess, once untouchable, looked at the screen like it was a guillotine blade hanging above her. This wasn't just a meeting anymore. It was judgment. The community hall emptied slowly, as if no one wanted to be the first to leave the wreckage of Tess's empire. People lingered in clusters, speaking in hushed tones, some refusing to look at the board members as they slipped out the side exit. The echo of the footage still hung in the air like smoke after a fire. This wasn't just exposure, it was unraveling. I stayed behind with a few neighbors who wanted to make sure I wasn't alone. My brother stood near the back wall, arms crossed, silent but steady. He didn't need to say anything. The outcome was already set in motion. Braden hovered near the podium, pale, but lighter than I'd ever seen him. He'd carried that guilt long enough. Tonight, he had finally let it go. When the room was nearly empty, a representative from the insurance carrier approached me. Gray suit, clipped tone, tablet in hand. She hadn't introduced herself during the meeting, but she'd watched everything, absorbed every detail. Now she gave a short nod. "We'll be proceeding with full review," she said quietly. "This includes board misconduct, suppression concerns, and compliance failures. Your documentation is substantial." I met her gaze. "They had chances to stop him." "I can see that," she hesitated. "Mr. Mirek, the findings in this case may invalidate your HOA's liability protections, effective immediately." That was the polite way of saying the board was finished. She left without another word. The echo of her heels faded down the hall. Outside, the night felt different, lighter. The oppressive weight that had sat on the neighborhood for months, years even, had lifted. People were talking, openly now, not looking over their shoulders, not whispering. The truth had cracked something open. As I walked home, neighbors nodded to me. Some quietly thanked me. One man I barely knew whispered, "My daughter was scared to play outside when Lyle was around. Thank you for taking him out of the shadows." I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired, heavy, but steady. I turned down my street, the dim glow of porch lights guiding me home. My house looked the same from the outside, quiet, ordinary, but I felt the gravity of what waited inside. My son, my wife, my family who had stood through every second of hell this week had thrown at us. I stepped through the front door and found Callan on the couch with my wife. He had headphones on, listening to one of his audiobooks, the one about the space dog finding colors it couldn't see. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. My wife looked at me with a question in her eyes. "How did it go?" she asked quietly. I kneeled beside Callan, touched his hand, and felt his fingers curl instinctively around mine. "It's done," I said. "They're going to answer for all of it." Her shoulders dropped in relief. A shuddered breath slipped out. She leaned her forehead against mine, silent tears mixing with relief and exhaustion. Callan reached out with his free hand. "Dad?" "Yeah, buddy, I'm here." He touched my face gently, mapping my features the way he had begun to do since the bandages came off. There was no hesitation in his movement, no fear, just acceptance, forward motion. "What happened?" he asked. "People told the truth," I said, "and the ones who lied can't anymore." He nodded slowly, like he didn't need details, just reassurance. His world had gone dark, but he still trusted the sound of my voice. Later, when he was asleep, I stepped out back to the treehouse. The deflated balloons hung limp in the breeze, their colors muted under the porch light. I sat on the ground beneath it, leaning against the base of the old trunk. This spot had held laughter once, then pain. Tonight, it held something different, the start of repair. I knew the treehouse would never be the same, neither would we. But this wasn't the end, it was the beginning of rebuilding, carefully, deliberately, honestly. Tess Margrave resigned within 48 hours. Lyle was taken into custody the next week after the ATF completed their initial investigative round. The HOA was placed under temporary administrative supervision, pending complete restructuring. Every neighbor received written notification of the board's misconduct findings. Federal involvement ensured no piece of evidence could be buried again. Justice didn't fix everything, but it brought accountability, and accountability brought breath. I looked into the night sky, imagining the colors Callan once loved, and whispered a promise that wasn't for the HOA or the neighborhood or even the law. It was for him. We're going to build something better. If you've ever fought a battle no one believed or stood alone until the truth forced the world to look, tell me what language you speak at home.